I was battling the whole concept of I had cancer, but I want to move forward and move on with my life. And there were times where I was just trying to block it out. I'm like, I don't want to be known as the person who had cancer. I'm more than that. But late at night or just random days, I would just be crying because it is what I went through. And to me, and I don't know about you, Shauna, but it is a part of my identity. And I've kept fighting this for myself because I didn't want to admit that for the longest time. But now I'm admitting that it is. And I just have to accept that.
Hey everyone, welcome to season 3. This is Shauna.
And this is Rosalina, and we're your hosts for Too Young for This Shit podcast. This podcast is not just about boobs, but a journey with cancer. We are young millennials, open about giving you our raw and unfiltered look into our lives. We are in no way medical professionals, nor are we offering medical advice. Any medical references are cited directly from public websites or from our personal diagnosis. Some topics and stories may be triggering to those who are fighting, have fought, or have loved someone with cancer. Hi everyone, this is Rosalina.
And this is Shauna. Welcome back to the Too Young for This Shit podcast.
So this is our final episode of season 3. And just to end out our season, we want to talk about cancer and how it has factored into our identities and how that's changed throughout our journeys. And of course, everyone experience identities differently, and whether they think that cancer is a part of their identity or not can vary from person to person. But to start off, Shauna, has cancer been a factor as part of your identity in the beginning of your diagnosis? Or I guess just take us through, like, is cancer even a part of your identity?
So I think in the very beginning of being diagnosed, I was in such a shock of processing what was happening to me, but also going through obviously all the appointments and gathering the information and all of that. So I don't think it really hit me that I actually had cancer. Not that it didn't hit me, but the reality I think really set in for me for my mastectomy surgery is when it really hit me that this shit got real almost. And I think chemo was when I think I had first felt like I am an actual cancer patient. This is now who I am at current, where I'm at currently. And it's really sad to me actually, because I went from just being Shauna and just doing my daily routines and being in my relationship and having my family and just almost feeling like I was just like a normal, typical 32-year-old woman. Then that shifted really quickly for me. And then I became Shauna the cancer patient. And that's what all I felt, I think, the first real year of my diagnosis, essentially. What about you, Rosalina?
I so resonate with what you said, because when I was going through my mastectomy surgery, I felt like I was able to still get that same person again. But as you mentioned, once we both got into chemotherapy around the same time, that's when I think I felt more, oh shit, like I am going to look really sick. And I think that's the physical part of it, is that you're going to look sick, you're going to lose your hair, you're not going to have eyebrows or eyelashes, and your body is going to feel very different because you're going to be tired all the time, you're going to feel fatigue. And so once chemotherapy began, that's when it was more of a shock to me of, oh crap, cancer is going to be a part of my identity. And then also, I did lose myself too. I lost myself in the process.
I think too, I don't know if this is the same for you, but I feel like when I started chemo, I felt like a cancer patient, but then I also started being treated like a cancer patient. That's when everyone came out of the woodworks. People, I think, when I first found out, came from all over. But even when I was going through chemo, I had a whole different dynamic of people coming in, just checking on me and asking me how I was all the time. And I haven't heard much from them now that I'm in remission, other than you're good now. But I think that also made it feel more real too. It was like when people started actually treating me as if I was a cancer patient.
Yeah, I'm trying to think back. I don't think that anyone has treated me in terms of family and friends has treated me differently. I think what people did was they try to tread lightly and they didn't want to, I don't know what it is they probably just were afraid to say anything.
They didn't want to like bombard you and then obviously put anything more on your plate than you were actually going through.
Yeah, for
Right.
sure. How about radiation? Did you still feel like a cancer patient as well?
Radiation, I think I just felt really broken. So at that point, yes, it was like cancer had really become all of my life at that point. I started radiation the very end of October and finished I think the last day of November, the first day of December, I can't remember. But that was essentially my diagnosis. The day I was diagnosed was January 5th. That was my entire year, was everything was just cancer. And so by the time radiation hit, I was just broken. I just felt like cancer had taken so much of me, not only physically, but so much mentally and emotionally. And I was just so done at that point. I was done with cancer, but it was like all I had dealt with for a year. When you went through radiation, did you feel similar or you felt, no, you felt like you were ready to conquer the world? You had the different,
Yeah, I did. Don't get me wrong, like radiation was so tough.
yeah.
Like the burns and all of that was not great whatsoever because like you said, cancer has taken so much of our life for a whole year. I was diagnosed right after Shauna in February. And so I'm like sick and tired of this. I just want the old person back. And, I want to live my life and start and not have this like identity of being a cancer person or like a person who has cancer to be like a part of me. And so, right after, I guess, like maybe in the midst of radiation and then after I completed treatment is when I was like, okay, I don't want to be known as the cancer person anymore. Let's move on. That was my mindset at the time for a few months.
I think like after radiation, like I said, I was a hot mess. Anyone could go back and listen to like season 2 and listen to how I dealt with all of that. But I I almost felt like because it was everything that I dealt with for a year, that like I was still processing it and like I would bring it up a lot. Like I would talk about it a lot. It would just like be like in any like casual conversation, like somehow it would always end up coming up because again, was like a full year of my life. So anything like recently, I would have to almost mention it. I think part of me was also like processing what had happened to me, but like I did realize I was like talking about it a lot. I kept bringing it up and it was like almost to the point where it was like annoying me as well. It had to have been annoying for everyone else around me because it was just like all that consumed me. I couldn't have a normal conversation without that coming up. And I think at that point too, a lot of people wanted to treat me normal, right? Because I was done. I think they even knew that I was so sick and tired of cancer that like they didn't want to bring it up, but I kept bringing it up. So it ended up being this like almost like weird energy anytime I would be around people that just, and they didn't know what to say. And I felt like that was like the real beginning of survivorship for me, where I didn't even know who I was. And then processing too, like I have cancer and then now I had cancer. That was a weird thing to process as well.
Yeah, I was battling the whole concept of I had cancer, but I want to move forward and move on with my life. And there were times where I was just trying to block it out. I'm like, I don't want to be known as the person who had cancer. I'm more than that. But late at night or just random days, I would just be crying because it is what I went through. And to me, and I don't know about you, Shauna, but it is a part of my identity. And I kept fighting this for myself because I didn't want to admit that for the longest time. But now I'm admitting that it is. And I just have to accept that.
I think that's like such an interesting take because I guess I didn't even realize it was a part of my identity at that point, especially at the beginning of like survivorship. Like I didn't know how to factor that in, or I didn't even know who I was post treatment. But I think as the time went on, I accepted that this obviously happened to me. This was a part of my life. And yes, this is now a part of my identity, essentially, for sure.
Yeah. And I think like also with this podcast too, I feel like it has become a part, like even more a part of our identities because we're doing this podcast together and we're trying to just create a community of women who are going through similar things and we want to help. And that's why we decided to do this podcast in the first place. And so I don't know how we could just run away from cancer not being a part of our identity when we do this work on weekly, monthly basis.
Absolutely. And I think that if I didn't have the podcast, like yes, we have this community, obviously. We've also like built this community within our podcast and with our listeners, but privately, like outside of my life, I'm always telling like the people in my life, go get yourself checked, do anything you can to get whatever you need medically. Like I'm always telling people and just like making sure people are taking care of themselves. And that is like a sense of advocacy that I just didn't realize, I think, until doing this podcast. Even like the shift from being a cancer patient to like now with the podcast, we're like cancer advocates.
Yeah, I love that.
And I think if I didn't have the podcast, I wouldn't consider myself an advocate because I didn't know that when I even go and share my story with other people privately, just with people in my life, that is advocacy. And I wouldn't have known that had I not been in this space. So yeah, I think from treatment even to like the beginning of survivorship, like I felt like a cancer patient. Now I feel more of like a cancer advocate.
Yeah, well said. I love that because, like you mentioned, without being a part of this space, I also would have never known that I was a breast cancer advocate as well. But let's talk about labels though, because I think we have a similar take on this. I don't like calling myself a cancer survivor, thriver, etc. But I know that like we do for others on this podcast. And I don't care if other people call me that, but I essentially just don't like calling myself that. I just say, yeah, I had cancer. But Shauna, what about you?
I've never called myself like a cancer survivor ever. I've always said I've had cancer, or I went off on somebody on Facebook today, which I don't normally do, but I did. And it was for a breast cancer pub crawl. Make that make sense. Make it make sense. Like a bar crawl that like is apparently benefiting breast cancer some way, somehow. I don't know. The event had no information, none. And so I asked, like, where is this money going to? How much of the proceeds are going? And again, that was like my advocacy kicking in full throttle. But
Absolutely.
even when I had explained in my Facebook comment, as someone who was diagnosed with cancer and fought cancer, I can't just call myself that. Especially in this community too, right? A survivor is someone who fought cancer and is in remission. Stage 4 thrivers are people that are living with metastatic breast cancer. There is labels to know everybody's like journey and where they're at. And I think that's like a great way to do it, obviously, so everyone kind of knows. But I personally, I'm with you, Rosalina. I don't like to call myself that at all.
Yeah.
And kudos to anyone who does. Like, we're not knocking it. It's
No,
just,
it's just our own opinion, and we just don't like to label ourselves as that.
yeah. Like,
Uh,
I didn't ask to be a survivor. Like,
yeah.
who wants to be in survival?
I also feel like cancer was imposed in our lives. We couldn't control that either.
Right.
We never wanted to have cancer in the fucking first place.
Right.
Like who wants to have cancer, you know what I mean? It's
Right.
like the worst possible thing that could ever happen in your fucking life.
Yeah. Exactly. I'm with you. So it's funny because like, would you rather be called a cancer survivor or a cancer patient?
Oh my god, no, I don't like cancer patient. That's even worse for me.
Yeah, I don't know. I didn't think about it until just now. I'm going to have to come back with an answer for that one because I don't know. That's going to
Okay.
take some deep reflection.
Now that we're in survivorship mode or whatever you want to call it, have you had some control over your identity?
I think so. Yes. I think after getting my implants, like my breast reconstruction finished, I think that was the moment for me that like you felt after radiation. For me, that felt like I was like ready to get going, like ready to move forward and get it together because I had spent the first 6 months unwell and also getting the loop rod out of my body. I was starting to feel better and feel more like myself, like I said, pre cancer. And so by like June, like middle of the year of 2022, so my first year in survivorship, that's when I think I was starting to feel joy again and feel I don't know, like I was able to go out and live and actually live and feel things because I felt like I didn't do that for a good 6 months after. But I think at that point, it was, like, less and less that I brought it up, and I was meeting, like, a lot of new people, and especially at work, like, meeting new nannies, like, I hang out with a nice crew of nannies, and some of them don't know what I've gone through, some of them do, but not all of them, and I don't bring it up all the time now. I've met new friends along the way that I don't know if they know, I'm sure we have, like, mutual friends, so I'm sure they know, but they don't ask about it, and I'm definitely more comfortable with talking about it, I think, but not in a way where it's like in an uncomfortable space. It's nice too because people will ask like about the podcast. Like that's what I like now more. It's more of like they'll say like, "Oh, how you doing? Like, how's your podcast going?" You know, and I actually like talking about this space that we're in right now as far as doing the podcast. All of the great experiences we've gotten to do this past year, the breasties panel, the Brem panel, like me being able to speak in like my hometown, like in front of an array of different women from all different backgrounds. And obviously, do I wish I was at this point of that I had cancer and I'm doing this now? Obviously not. But this is what's like filling my cup now. This is what is giving me like a purpose now. And it's funny because the talk that I did in my local town, like I did like a women's wellness event and they had a pastor there that was talking and she actually like pointed at me. She went on like a 45-minute sermon that I was like very overwhelmed by. But she looked at me and she said, "You have a purpose." And it like really weirdly stuck with me. So I feel like I think now in survivorship, like that's where I'm at with my identity of being like, okay, like this happened to me and now what can I do with this? So that's been like a really nice shift, I'd say, compared to of the like, why did this happen to me? Why am I talking about this all the time? Like, why can't I stop talking about this? Like, why can't I process this? Why can't I feel anything after this? I felt like I was like, it was just cancer ruined me and took so much of me. And now I just almost feel like a little bit of a, not a rebirth, because it's not essentially what it was, but just, I don't know, like a little bit more of, I guess, a confidence boost, like a self esteem thing. I don't know. I can't really quite put into words what that actually is, but that's, I think, what this last year of survivorship has really been for me.
Yeah. I was gonna say, so for me, I think I kind of went through like a roller coaster with this. And right after radiation, I basically tried to block out cancer as much as possible, even though I was working on this podcast. But I felt like I was just living two different lives. And then, like, meeting with friends and stuff, like, that was the first thing where I didn't want them to know. I don't want anyone who I met in, like, the first, 10 minutes to know that I'm a cancer survivor or, like, I went through cancer. And so I try to make it a thing where that wasn't a part of my identity at first. And then something happened where, like I mentioned, I think in the beginning of this episode, where I would just come home and start crying because of all the things that I went through. And I kind of had like an identity crisis because then I felt like I hit another period where I knew myself, but I didn't really know myself. And it's like, how do I tackle being a person who went through cancer, but also trying to live her life? And so I went through this up and down throughout the last 2 years. I would say but the biggest downfall for me was like earlier this year. I just crashed. I crashed and burned. And I think also that's why, Shauna, like I said, I need a break from this podcast. Like I'm not ready yet. And so it was more of I needed to focus on myself and get back, just focus on myself and not really focus on cancer. Like nothing with a podcast, not even like the IG handles and stuff like that. I just wanted to just focus on me and myself only and try to figure that out. But I also think that the biggest shift for me was, I talked about this before, was when my dance company asked me to be Selena for the performance. And that was such, to me, a rebirth. And I felt, I don't know, I'm gonna be cliche, but it's just like I felt like my wings like spread. And I literally felt like she was like there with me. And one, like, she's such an icon and so, like, respected. Every time I hear her music because it pops out of nowhere randomly, just, I don't know, in a club or just someone playing it in their car. I always just think back at that moment. It just gives me goosebumps. And my friends even mention, like, whenever they see the movie or they listen to the song, they think of me. And I just love that. And I just feel like she gave me a purpose of who I wanted to be and who I wanted to strive for. So I felt like that just changed everything for me.
And that was something you mentioned in season 1 when we were talking about what were we looking forward to, and you said, "I wanna join a dance company. I wanna get back to doing what I
Yeah,
love." And I think probably that moment for you was, like, that moment of being, "I'm back doing what I love, and cancer didn't get to take this from me." And
for the second time.
for the
Yeah.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. For the second time, I felt stronger too because the first time that I joined, it was like 2 months when I got out of radiation, and so I wasn't as strong enough, but when I came back for the second time, I felt, like, stronger and more capable. But I would definitely say at that period of time, there was definitely a shift, but again, the past few months where I really felt like cancer started to creep up and become my identity because again, like when you're have a purpose like this podcast, it takes so much of your time and hours. And so again, I felt like cancer was the number one. That's who I am. Like that's just what people know me as. And like now I'm just trying to figure out like how to not make it like the number one in terms of who I am or like how people would say who is Rosalina. So
Right.
I don't know. I know that's like a long-winded answer, but I'm still like just processing and going through this because it is such a battle.
We mentioned that in our grieving episode, it creeps back in sometimes. Some days feel really heavy, some days are light. When we're in this space, that all creeps back up. And I agree with like all of a sudden becoming, I don't think people actually don't realize we plan for months of what topics we want to talk about, who we want on the podcast, taking the time to record. We have meetings in between. There's like a lot that goes into this. And then on top of that's just the planning part. Then we also have to launch and we all have to do all the content for that. Oh, we're always connecting back to our cancer diagnosis, our journeys, our stories, hearing other people's stories, hearing other people. We had Kiara on the podcast, who's a stage 4 thriver, and hearing how her journey escalated. And there's just so much that goes into all of this and like mentally, and not only like the planning part, but like the emotional part of it is like very taxing for sure.
Yeah, and I also say, like, for me, I always knew I had a purpose. That's just who I am. Like, I know I had a gift or something along those lines. But the purpose became like this podcast. And I unfortunately had a similar experience where I went through cancer and now I'm talking about it on this podcast. So I think the hard thing for me is like because this is such a personal experience and then I'm also doing something as like a purpose like for me sometimes it's hard and I not that I wish, I don't know what the word is, but I essentially just sometimes wish that it wasn't tied to my personal experience because then I feel like I could put like a boundary on it and be like, okay, I'm helping people and stuff, but I can shut it off and do my own thing. And no, so that's the hard part for me is like I can't shut it off. And I'm working on that.
I think like asking for the space, obviously, it's like when it was time to, we put a date, a month on when we started to wanting to record all of, or like starting the planning process. And yeah, you did. You came to me and said, I need more time and I need a break. And I think honestly, I was just as happy to take that break too. As far as I was like, I don't know, I just felt like more connected to my body. I think I felt more connected to the people in my life. Like I felt more connected. I was like, I just felt like in a better groove. And like, I was very scared to have all of this come up and then derail all the progress that I made for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And when just like fear too, I'm not saying that, trust me, like, there's a lot of fear that I experience on a daily basis, but like it's like added things, right? Added anxiety, stress, like not saying that this is, again, it's all for a good cause and everything we do. And also the guilt of like almost feeling like we should be putting out episodes all the time. We should be posting more. We should be doing X, Y, and Z, and like feeling like we're letting other people down. And it's just like a lot of emotions that go into it for sure. But also, I think, yeah, like taking that time, obviously, we've talked about that a lot this season of giving ourselves grace, taking time for ourselves, how to like when to be on, when to be off. Yeah, no, it's definitely hard. I totally understand that for you, Rosalina. It's like hard to set the boundary. But I guess it's funny because when you were saying this, I kept thinking of how all of our doctors are like, yeah, everything in moderation. Like
Yeah.
that's kind of like what was like, and you're like setting boundaries. I'm like, yeah, we got to do like everything in moderation. And I'm like, tell me you've gone to 9,000 doctor's appointments without telling me you've gone to 9,000 doctor's appointments. Like everything in moderation. I think like learning that balance of everything in our life is obviously tied to our identities too. Because if we're just throwing ourselves into this podcast and we're in this cancer space all the time, that's going to be our only identity.
Yeah, for sure. And then I think also for anyone who's listening who has shared their stories and started to do that process, like if you feel along the way that you no longer want to do this anymore, or it's just becoming like taxing on your mental health, you can always just take a step back and you don't always need to be on. So I just also wanted to mention that too, because we have the right to take breaks. We have the right just to be like, we don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to keep sharing my story. I just want to move forward with my life and have some sort of a different identity, with whatever that might be.
Well, I think with that as well, it's just because you decide you want to stop doing something that is essentially has become your identity. Just because you stop, that doesn't mean that ends for you. That leads the pathway for other doors to open and other experiences and other goals and other things to start happening. And it's like not necessarily like a bad thing at all. We don't taking even like a break, not it doesn't have to be permanent, but like short breaks, little things. That was another big thing we touched on a lot this season, was just however you need to do that and take that space for yourself is you do it. It's important. It's important to recharge. It's important for everything and everybody that you also surround yourself with.
Yeah, and then talking about that with the personal relationships and stuff, I know, Shauna, you talked about it. For me, more people in my life talk about the podcasts and not necessarily like how I'm doing and such. And you know what? It's not a bad thing at all. I am fine to talk about the podcast. And I'm just not the person that likes to talk about herself. Again, I am doing this podcast, but this is different than talking to someone about me, essentially. And so when someone asks about the podcast, I would like light up and wanting to talk about it because it's such a huge part of me. But in terms of like my personal journey and when I'm going through, like close friends, I would probably say something if they really ask, but I try to never bring it up because I just don't want that to be in a conversation all the goddamn fucking time. I am trying to move on. I'm trying to heal from the trauma that I fucking went through. So I just want to be present. And I'm more than just the person who had cancer. That's like also my mindset there too.
Yeah. How do you look at, we said the shift from being like a cancer patient, like now being in survivorship, like going to doctor's appointments, and like I've been calling it cancer maintenance because I just don't know what else to call it. Like we're still taking care of ourselves. We still have to be on hormone meds. We still have to do all of that. Do you feel like a shift there? Do you remember going to the doc? Like I'll never forget my first day at my oncologist's office and being the youngest person in the room. Like that is something that I will never, that is so ingrained in my head. I will never forget that. And I don't know, now I feel like I'm a veteran at the, at like my doctor's appointments. I'm like, all
Yeah.
right, I've done it all. Like whatever, I go in, I know what to expect. It's just like, I'm not saying scans are really like that. Like I obviously know the drill. Like I know how to prepare and I know actually what's going to happen. I'm going to have some anxiety. It's like I'm more prepped for that now than I think I was. But as far as shifting from cancer patient to now being in cancer maintenance, how's your identity, even like at your hospital? Like, how do you feel when you're there?
Yeah, I actually don't feel any different. Like what you mentioned, I think you're correct in like feeling a veteran because I feel that way too. Like I just go in, I know where to go, like I know like the process. But also, I don't know about with your doctors, Shauna, but they are a little bit more like relaxed. Like, of course, they're still doing their job, but they want to know more about like my life. And so they ask me like all these different questions about what's going on, how's Brian? Like, it's like a total shift. I don't know if your doctors do that.
My breast surgeon, like nurse coordinator, will always ask about Matt, which is so cute. I just love it. She always asks. My plastic surgeon will always be like, how many kids are you watching now? Because she's been pregnant basically at the same time as my boss has. She'll be like, how many is there now? And it's been like a really like running joke. But yeah, I definitely feel that. But I think we should just start calling ourselves cancer veterans. I think that's going to be the term that I'm okay with. So I'm not a cancer survivor. I'm a cancer veteran.
Yeah, I know a person who does call themselves that,
Really? I've never heard
but
of
I don't
it.
know if I'm ready.
Oh. I think I would prefer it. I'd prefer it over the survivor.
Over Kiss the Survivor. Yeah.
So I'm gonna shift that into my cancer identity.
To wrap this up, I know this is a very cliche question, but I also think that this will be just helpful for anyone out there who is going through an identity crisis. Shauna, if you had to describe yourself, who is Shauna?
Who is Shauna now post cancer?
Yes.
Okay. So Shauna post cancer is I'm a partner, I'm a sister, I'm a daughter, I'm a friend, I am a caretaker, I am a cancer advocate, I am a podcast host. What are we at? 8? I mean, 8's good, right?
You're a dog mom.
Oh yeah, I'm a dog mom. That should have been my first answer. Fucked up.
And you love Law and Order. I feel like
Yes,
that's still post
I'm a super fan.
post Ginster.
Yes, I'm a
Okay,
super
yes.
fan. But yes, I would say it's funny because I think I listed 5 things before I would have mentioned breast cancer. And I don't know. I don't know if in my first year, if we wrapped up the season being like, who is Shauna? I don't know. I don't know where my answer would have landed on that. But I feel like good that it's not in the top 5.
Yeah.
How about you? Who is Rosalina post cancer?
I know, right? That's
I gotta
very
specify.
specific. Yes. So I am Latina. This still is relevant. I am first generation American. I am a sister. I don't like to say little sister, but I like to say sister because I feel like that's not relevant anymore. I'm not little. I have a partner, but now I am a fiance. I just got engaged on Sunday.
Congratulations. Hello.
Yes, I know. I know.
Oh my
Thank
God.
you.
Okay, fiance.
I am a dancer. I am passionate. I am lovable. I'm caring. I am a friend.
Dog mom.
Yes, I am. Yes, I am a dog mom to Louis Felipe. That's his last name. He's still going to have my last name. And that's who Rosalina is. Yes.
Okay, we're going to talk about this fiance thing. So let's wrap it up.
Yes.
So that's a wrap on season 3. Thank you guys so much for supporting us and listening to us and everything that we've gone through the last 3. Has it been 3? Yeah, like almost 3 years. We can't thank you guys enough for all the support, and we appreciate you guys always. A very special thanks to our podcast producer, Bethany Allard, and our podcast editor, Ayla Anderson.
Thank you all for listening and supporting our podcast. Sharing our stories with you has been incredibly healing for both of us, and we hope it helps other women in their journeys through breast cancer.
Ladies, if you enjoyed this episode, please share it with your friends and fellow breasties. Help us reach more women by subscribing and rating us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and now on YouTube. You can follow us on Instagram at TYFTS Podcast and email us at tftspodcast@gmail.com. We love hearing from you guys, so shoot us a message. We will link any resources from the episode in our show notes.